Thank you. Thank you. I'm Tom Turk. I'm the Dean of the George L. Arduis School of Business and Economics, and I'm delighted to welcome you here in person and to the more than 4,000 people registered to watch this online. We've got so many board members here, students, parents, alumni. I'm thrilled to welcome all of you here. I was looking over my comments last year, December 2020, we were right back here, and I noted that I had read that in June 2020, we thought the lockdown would be a thing of the past by now. So that's the first forecast that's wrong out of us. But here we are again. I assume this June we thought we were putting this behind us, and we're, new restrictions coming literally tomorrow. The inflation that we warned about is here. The labor market is shrinking. The supply chains are lengthening. And with the level of economic uncertainty we're faced, my advice is do not even think about making a major investment or financing decision without first listening to the analysis of President Emeritus Dr. Jim Doty, Dr. Ramon Sphere, the director of the Anderson Center for Economic Research, and Fidel Lawande, who is the director of the Hoag Center for Real Estate and Economics. And I can't wait to hear what they have predicted for this coming year. But at the Arduis School, despite the economic uncertainty, we have really forged ahead. We added some nationally known scholars to our faculty. In fact, our faculty has grown 50% over the past 4 years. And our national prominence is growing as well. We're starting to see more articles, op-ed pieces from our faculty in the Wall Street Journal. In fact, they've been cited by other scholars, their research has been cited by other scholars over 210,000 times. And that's up 70% from when we first measured this 3 years ago. And even more exciting is we looked into how many people have viewed our faculty's speeches, interviews, events that they've put on online, and they've been viewed more than 2.2 million times. So they're really getting a new level of national attention, I think, the past few years. We also just graduated our first class in the Master of Science in Real Estate, all of which had job offers accepted at graduation. As did all of our Master of Science in Accounting students and all of our participants in the James Residency Program. And 91% of our full-time MBAs. I don't know who those other two were, but they did great too. And so it's really been, we also just admitted our most qualified MBA class ever and our second group of 10 Arduis scholars into our graduate programs. So we're excited about that as well. A lot of people have, of course, contributed to the success, the work of our faculty and staff. A lot of people in this room today have been important supporters of the work we're doing, the university administration. But there's one person I would like to call out in particular who I think has been instrumental to our success over the past few years, and that's our Senior Associate Dean, Dr. Candice Ibarra. I think she's watching online, but those of you that know her, she is relentless in pushing us to be better, never accepting the status quo, whether it's raising the bar for the faculty that we hire, the students that we enroll, the programs that we deliver, the services that we provide. She's always pushing to make sure we take it to the next level, and as a result has nudged all of us, especially me, to being more able to realize the potential that we have. And so I'd appreciate if you take a moment to thank her for along with me, for her 25 years as an outstanding professor and then more than 4 years as a Senior Associate Dean. So thank you, Candice. Now I'd like to take a minute to thank our sponsors. With the help of the sponsors and the people who've attended these forecasts over the years, we've raised more than $5 million for scholarships for students. And so first I'd like to acknowledge our title sponsor, Bank of America, our platinum sponsor. Our platinum sponsor is Edwards Life Sciences. Our gold sponsors, Julie and George Arduous, Christine and Bradley Comp, C&L Refrigeration, and Schools First Federal Credit Union. Our silver sponsor, First American, Kaiser Permanente, and RCI Holding. Our bronze sponsors are Orco Block, Whittier Trust, and Yasai Properties. And our patron sponsors, the City of Hope, Orange County, Tangram Interior, and the Morissette family. And I'd particularly like to thank Don Morissette, who is the newest member of our founding board of our real estate program. So thank you so much, Don. Our media sponsors are the Orange County Business Journal and the Orange County Register. And now we have a short commercial from our title sponsor, Bank of America.
What should the world expect from a bank? Perhaps a bank dedicated to meeting the challenge of change. A bank that honors the business environment and the natural environment with equal passion. Providing people and businesses the tools and insights they need to succeed. And offering people and communities the resources to flourish. A bank that recognizes that economies fluctuate, but values don't. And never forgetting, our only ambition is to help you fulfill yours. What would you like the power to do?
Alan Staff here to represent Bank of America. Alan is the head of commercial real estate banking. He's also the head of real estate and lodging syndications. And in his spare time, he's corporate banking president for Bank of America of Orange County. He's also been a member of our Board of Counselors, the Arduous School of Business and Economics Board of Counselors for a number of years, and has been a dear friend to us. He graduated from Drake University, got his MBA at Loyola University of Chicago, and so please join me in welcoming Alan Staff.
That's okay. Thank you, Tom. We start off with this question. The question is, what would you like the power to do? Every day at Bank of America, we ask that question. We ask it of our customers, our employees, and our partners in our community. By listening to how they answer that question, we learn about what is important to them. Asking our question begins a conversation and helps us learn how Bank of America can best deliver on our purpose. And being a company of purpose is essential to our business and to the customers and communities we serve. There is an increasing expectation for companies to integrate environmental, social, and governance considerations into their core purpose, strategy, and operations. This is being driven by three dynamics. One, an understanding that there are significant issues that we must address. Two, a growing focus by customers, employees, investors, and community partners that companies have a role and a responsibility to address these issues. And three, companies that manage ESG well will perform better. For environmental considerations, there is a focus on carbon neutral and net zero, and there is also a focus in the marketplace as we develop, we finance, and build new clean technologies in areas like energy, transportation, and agriculture. A key part of our ESG approach is through sustainable finance, where we deploy capital to have a sustainable impact on environmental or social issues and still provide a profitable return to investors. In 2020, we deployed more than $100 billion of sustainable finance, almost double from the 2019 level. Bank of America is committed to improving the environment and how we approach our business strategy, how we work with partners, how we make our operations more sustainable, support our employees, manage risk, and govern our activities. For example, our company achieved carbon neutrality in 2019, a year ahead of schedule, and we have a goal of net zero by 2050. We also invest locally to help our community here in Orange County. One example is our investment in the first urban farm over asphalt at the Second Harvest Food Bank. That farm uses 90% less water and energy while reducing carbon emissions as the produce is transported locally. Bank of America has partnered with Chapman University for over 40 years, and Chapman is also supporting environmental initiatives on campus, from advocacy to research. For example, scientists in the Schmid College of Science and Technology are researching how rangeland systems respond to changes in weather to help ranchers make better decisions about their business. Speaking of world-class research, after the Chapman team shares their insights today about the economy, I know we'll be better informed and inspired to ask the question, what would you like the power to do? Now I'd like to turn it over to our local expert on the economy, my friend, Dr. Jim Doty.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Alan. Well, thank you, Bank of America, and all of our sponsors. And I'd like to thank you, this crowd that braved the inclement weather. I thought I'd have no audience here this afternoon, but it's great to see so many brave people. And also, I understand that 3,000 plus virtual. But those of you who are here, if it's any relief, I just got a call from Jerome Powell at the Fed, and he told me, on good authority, that the storm is only transitory. So it'll be all over by the time you leave Musco Center. Speaking of Musco Center, you may notice in the Musco box, Paul Musco isn't with us. Sadly, he passed away several months ago, but what a legacy of great friendship with many people, his incredible philanthropy, and for giving us this magnificent performing arts center. What an incredible legacy that is. Thank you, Paul. Well, this is going to be, it was an exciting year, and we're looking now at 2022. But before we get into that, I'd like to give you this best response, runner-up. I'll give you the winning evaluation later at the end of the presentation. My final exam is tomorrow. In fact, I think I have a number of students out here in the audience. I don't have this semester, so this is an old one. But it's, even though Dr. Doty's old, I'm impressed he knows Excel. I have to tell you this, I'm so excited. And this is, I guess, a lesson for all of us. Getting old ain't that bad. This last September 26th, I celebrated my 75th birthday, and the significance, thank you, thank you. The significance to me was that moved me from the 70 to 74 age cohort in marathoning, and they give you a first, second, and third medal for the first, second, and third in your age cohort. It moved me into the 75 to 79 age cohort in running. So instead of being a bum, an old bum in the 70 to 74 age cohort, all of a sudden, I could be a contender again. And here I am at the end of that race in Chicago. I came in number one. Thank you. Now, there are only 10 other codgers in that 75 to 70. Still, it was number one, and I understand in Chicago, I'm now known as the Usain Bolt of Chicago. By the way, on this race, and this is a test for you, the audience, and if you're with it or not. If you laugh, you're with it. If you're not, the parade is passing you by. I actually took 15 seconds, my running score, I sacrificed 15 seconds to take a photograph of this poster. At least this is not, it is pretty good. Some of you actually get it. This is the young people they're going crazy for Korean drama. Squid is the Extreme series, and Squid Game is probably the most popular of all these Korean dramas that students, young people are watching. The joke here is that in the Squid Games, it's a competition, but if you lose, you have a good chance of being killed. So that's what the joke is here. Okay, U.S. forecast. What we have here, I don't think you can see it, but this is a listing of some of the 50 blue chip forecasters around the nation, colleges, banks, forecast agencies, and this is in rank of back in January or December last year, their forecast for real GDP. And put it in rank order. The highest, that forecast agency, which expected the highest, Goldman Sachs, was forecasting 5.9, then goes down from there, all the way down to the bottom, the 50th. Chapman was fourth highest, so we were obviously an outlier, very optimistic at 5.7. And if someone were to ask me right now, what will real GDP be this year, and in fact, it's in your forecast review, we are now forecasting 5.7%. So it looks like it's going to be a bullseye. Although for those of you who are wondering what did USC do, and I always am, they didn't have a forecast this year, nor did they field the lacrosse team, so I can't tell you how they did there. They would have lost against Chapman. We went to the we lost against BYU, but it was the national championship game, so we had a great team. But UCLA is in this, so for those of you who are UCLA fans, they were of the 50, they ranked 23rd with a forecast of 3.6%. Now what's telling is that 3.6 seems kind of low, but there were 27 forecasters even below that number, which again points out that this forecast of 5.7 was a real outlier, and if not a bullseye, it's going to be really close to the mark. Now in the forecast, I'm going to explain why we were so optimistic. Before we do that, this is a photograph of my Kindle. I may be the Usain Bolt of Chicago, but my eyesight leaves something to be desired. I love reading Kindle because you can increase the font size. But here, since COVID hit, the public has socked away $136.4 billion in savings. With it burning a hole in their pockets, the administration's real quandary now is how to prevent a national buying spree. In Kansas City, President Biden strutted down the street. A person called, "Hey, Joe, what about inflation?" Biden called back, "I got my eyes on it." Now, here's the joke I'm pulling on you. This is not from a current history book. This is actually a page from a book I'm reading now on Kindle, The Glory and the Dream. It's a great book, by the way. I highly recommend it. It's a U.S. history from 1930 to 1970. Does not include the current period. And this is from a chapter, Life with Harry Truman. Here's the real page. I changed the word COVID. In the actual article, it's World War II, and Joe Biden is Harry Truman. The point here is that history repeats itself. That page, and in fact, the entire chapter, if you just change a few words, World War II to COVID, Truman to Biden, you would read it and you wouldn't even notice the difference. Here are headlines. Our crack team from the Leatherby Library got me these from newspapers, and you can see these are, if you change the name Truman to Biden, it would be virtually the same kinds of headlines we're reading today. Now, for those of you who have been of the opinion that the that the accuracy of political pronouncements leaves a lot to be desired, that increasingly politicians have got worse and worse in terms of the validity of their statements. I don't agree with that. I think they've always been half-baked, as indicated here. Truman asked higher wages without an increase in prices. I love that one. And it points out that history repeats itself. By the way, that's the beauty of econometrics. Econometrics is all about quantifying, putting numbers on what's going on in the past and expecting that history will repeat itself, and those numbers can give us something that we can make inferences about in the future. Here's what happened back in World War II, actually post-World War II, between 41, that was the beginning of the war, all the way to 46. You can see the Federal Reserve Board increased the money supply to more than 25%. Prices were dropping throughout that time of incredible escalation of the money supply. But then, after a lag, inflation picked up, as you can see, all the way to double-digit rates. Check that out. That's 41 to 46. Here's where we are today, from 1901 to the present. Again, an increase in the money supply, almost virtually is the same, an increase to about 25%. And with a lag, inflation hit. And the only difference is, notice here the prices went up to 13%. Here it's about half of that. The reason for that is back in the late 70s, early 80s, they changed the way they calculate the price index. Back then, home prices were included in the price index. Now it's just rental equivalents. So that the 30% increases in prices that we've been reading about, that's not in the price index. And some economists have gone back. Oh, by the way, you wonder, why did they change it? That was a time of increasing prices. It was causing Social Security payments to go through the roof because of the automatic escalation clause. So if they could get inflation down, those automatic payments wouldn't increase as much. So that was, I think, the rationale. But the bottom line is that now, if we were to go back and standardize the actual criteria for measuring the CPI, it would be virtually the same, at least some economists. We haven't, but some economists have measured it, and it would be double digit rather than the 6 to 7% we're experiencing most recently. I don't know how many of you were back at the update forecast, but it was an interesting time, because at the time we did not have, inflation was starting to bump up against 2.5%, maybe a little higher than what we've had, but nothing serious. And that's when Jerome Powell was saying it's transitory. But I pointed out that the next 6 months of the year will be a great acid test between the new monetarists and the old monetarists. The old monetarists, Milton Friedman, who believed that money matters, and the new monitors who believe fiscal policy and money matters doesn't have, those policies don't have that much of an impact. And I said this would be a good test to see what happens now. Well, I think Jerome Powell threw in the towel when he said recently, it's time to retire transitory when talking about inflation. It's pretty structural now, and I think Milton Friedman won that battle with his belief that inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. And here, back in June, when we were talking about it, just look at every time the money supply increased more than 10% going back historically, every time that's happened, we've had significant inflation. I'm not going to go through all three, we don't have the time for it, but let me just look at this one in the most recent one, in the mid-80s. Notice the money supply went from 8.6 to 12.5%. Prices, just like after the war, prices, at least at the beginning, continued to drop in spite of that monetary spike. But 3/4, inflation finally hit, going up to 2.5 to 4.6. Not as much as we have now, but this is not 25% increase in the money supply. That's why we were virtually certain back then in June that there's going to be a spike. And this transitory business, we felt, was nonsense. What do we have now? Here's where we are now again. This is as of the third quarter, the most recent data, and you can see the increase from 7.9% to 25% increase in the money supply. Since then, it's come down. But notice, again, a three-quarter lag, prices started to increase, just about the time we forecasted it. And now the prices, that CPI is on the right-hand side, that's in gray, and that's most recent data that came out was 6.8%. Okay, what's our forecast now through 2022? We believe the money supply growth, not the level, but the growth will continue to drop, mainly because of, you probably heard of monetary tapering. The Federal Reserve has announced that this $125 billion asset buying, bond buying program, which has increased, that's what's increased the money supply, will taper to zero by mid-year. They're meeting as we speak here, the Federal Reserve, and I wouldn't be at all surprised for you to read in the headlines that the tapering will end even sooner than that, and federal funds rate increases will happen sooner than what they've been suggesting. What's our forecast for inflation? In spite of the fact that monetary supply growth, we see inflation being very persistent, stubbornly high, and what economists call sticky. Structural inflation is tough to beat. As I'm going to talk about later, generally you can only beat it with a recession, sadly. But we see inflation staying persistently high. One of the reasons, what evidence do we have? First of all, the lagged impact of all of this monetary growth in the past. The slowdown in money, that may happen, that may have an impact next year, but because of the lagged effect, most of the increase is going to be with us, adding to demand pressure and supply pressure in 2022. But another compelling reason that buttresses our forecast of persistent inflation, producers' prices, which will ultimately feed through the system, and as you can see, that's just continuing to go up. And just recently in October is now at, was 23% year-to-year inflation. Okay, here are a couple of things that I'd like to just bring to your attention. And it's a lesson in, I think, in assessing inflation, which is, that's the theme, if you will, because it's inflation that's leading to the kinds of changes that will determine what happens, not only in 2022, but 23 as well. Here, Biden is responding to soaring inflation. He orders the Economic Council to reduce energy. I don't know what the Economic Council is going to do about reduce, but anyway, that's what he wants to do. What got Biden charged up about this? Well, here's the price of gasoline. This is not California, unfortunately. This is the U.S. average. That increase is 61%. You know, prices have been going up, you know, as bad as they are, not 61%. And so Biden, the president, responds to this. It has to be these cartels, these money-gouging oil companies. I want you to recall now back to your principles of economics. Do you remember something called inelastic supply? When the supply can't, at least in the short run, increase very much, even if prices go up, because there's only so much of it over a short period of time. That's the structural characteristic of oil companies. So when demand increases as a result of a recovery, the post-COVID recovery, prices spike up more than other products or services. Let's take a longer run view of this. Let's go back to the third quarter of 18, when gas prices dropped sharply, almost 35%. Biden is looking at the increase during the recovery. But if you take a longer perspective, in fact, gas prices, at least since late 2018, about the same as overall prices. So just as oil prices spike up positively when demand is increasing because of that inelastic supply, they'll also drop more rapidly than other products will. It's just the nature of the industry. Here's another good one. Senator Warren. And this one really hit me because I'm a poultry farmer of sorts. Many of you know that I have beautiful chickens. Well, I'm not for feed, not for food, but egg laying. And here we have Senator Warren complaining about price fixing in the poultry sector. Again, the same idea of this cartel. By the way, nobody's invited me to any cartel meetings, even though I'm in the industry. Sad about that, because it's kind of neat. I'd like to find out, what do these cartels do, behind closed doors? Well, let's see what Senator Warren's charged up about. She sees turkey prices, this is October, this is our recent Thanksgiving, turkey prices had increased over the year 20%, in contrast to, 6% increase in prices. And this led to charges that has something to do with the bad poultry cartel. Okay, I'm a poultry farmer. I've noticed something recently, even in my own little egg-laying business. Do you know what chickens and turkeys do all year? I mean, all day? Okay, chickens anyway, I know they may spend 5 minutes laying an egg. But the rest of the day, they're eating. They're pecking around eating. They're eating chicken feed. I have to tell you, chicken feed is not chicken feed anymore. It's expensive. This is turkey and chicken feed prices going through the roof. I know I'm not starting to feed now. More of them are getting, their diet has changed to more spaghetti than they're getting, and the eggs have gotten better as a result. But the point here is that there's these bad cartels, their costs have gone up, and they're pushing the costs onto the public. It's not any cartel, it's the cost of doing business. If anything, they should get a medal for keeping prices as low as they did. Something else, the Federal Reserve, remember what they said. First of all, inflation's transitory. It's because of, semiconductors in limited supply, car prices, used car prices were going up. This will end. So it's just transitory. Then when it wasn't so transitory anymore, they said, you know what, we're going to start tapering our bond program. And that was like the first crack in their facade. Then, we're going to have to quicken the pace of that tapering. Then, you know what? Maybe the federal funds rate will have to increase. I mean, that was like the progression in time. What we know, looking at history, and remember, history repeats itself. Every time you've had a 200 basis point swing in prices, look at that first one, that's an increase in inflation. That's a gray line. Look what followed, an increase in every time. Every time you've had a 200 basis point swing in inflation, maybe a quarter, 6 months later, you get an increase in the federal funds rate. Same one here, and same thing here. Every time, without exception, which, if you believe Templeton and the 4 words that things don't change very much, if you believe this, the federal funds rate is going to increase. The question is when and how much. And let's look at that middle one, that one. That's an interesting one historically because it happened just before the Great Recession. This is when Alan Greenspan was the Federal Reserve Board chairman. And notice the federal funds rate went from 2 in 2002, beginning of 2002, down to 1%, while inflation was increasing. You'll hear now charges that Greenspan really messed up, that he kept the federal funds rate too low, in fact decreasing it, when he should have been increasing the rate. And if he had, the Great Recession would have been much more mild than it turned out to be. And that's why we believe the federal funds rate will increase roughly 50 basis points from 0.1 to 0.6. That's probably a minimum, and probably sooner rather than later. And the 10-year bond will increase from 1.6 to 2.5. This is the fourth quarter, 2022. And the 30-year mortgage rate, which will affect our forecast for housing and construction, from 3 to 3.9% by year end. If you've lost track of all the federal spending, that enters into what we think will happen to real GDP next year, because fiscal policy matters, especially when you have a Federal Reserve Board that has monetized that spending by buying up all that debt. So you've had no negative impact. You just had the spending side. And it adds up to like 10 trillion. Remember the old line, Everett Dirksen, my senator from Illinois, long time, he said, you know, $1 billion here, $1 billion there, it adds up. Now really it doesn't, but $1 trillion here and $1 trillion there adds up. $10 trillion. And some of that's going to be going into spending in 2022. Most of it in 20 and 21, but some in 22. Nonetheless, well, you could see here, 20 and 21, look at that. Deficits in the range of, each year, $3 to $3.5 trillion. Huge deficits. $6 trillion. That's huge. We've never had anything like that. All this spending that's increasing GDP, leading to like 5.7% real GDP growth this year, and we believe higher growth next year as well. In fact, even if some of it is spent, some of it has been saved. This is, I track the savings rate. You could get it if you want to do it yourself. Just go up Federal Reserve Board of St. Louis, call Fred, and Google it, and you'll get all kinds of data. Anyway, I looked at this on the savings rate, and what the heck is causing these spikes? I thought it might have something to do with COVID, but no, did a little more research, and it turns out that those were the months that the checks went out from the legislation, the COVID relief checks, if you will. And this indicates that it wasn't all spent. Some of it has gone into savings that will buttress spending in 2022. In addition, leading to strong growth next year, household net worth, comprised essentially of two things: the net value of a home and all investments, bonds and equities. This is the last known data, release data, is $142 trillion. Our estimate as of today, our Chapman estimate, that's closer to $160 trillion. Just think what that 30% annualized housing appreciation has done to home values, and the potential wealth effect of that spending, of that wealth on consumer spending. So we are forecasting 2022, another really gangbuster year. 4.4 is gangbuster. It's maybe lower than what we experienced in 21, but about double the normalized pre-COVID rate. Now, a recession in the future. By the way, in forecasting school, they teach us to, if we issue a forecast, don't ever give a date. Just give the forecast. Well, I'm going to give you a date here. I think the likelihood of recession is increasing, and increasing to the point where there's a slight possibility of recession late in 2022, but more likely 2023. And here are the factors that I think are leading to that. First of all, we know the Federal Reserve is going to start jacking up the federal funds rate, okay? Once they start that process, they have never been able to fine-tune it to prevent a recession. Every time it's led to recession. Those gray bars are recessions in the past. There's the federal funds rate starting to increase, you see. Notice the gray bar. There's another time. Notice the gray bar. Then the Great Recession, 07 to 9, there's the increase in the federal funds rate. This is when after Alan Greenspan waited so long, finally jacked it up sharply and led to the Great Recession. And they've never been able to fine-tune it enough. So why would this time be different? Why is the Federal Reserve that much smarter? Not if you look at their comments about transitory and the fact that they completely missed this spike in structural inflation. But here's the major reason. And people are not, analysts are not looking at that. Obviously, they're looking at that the Fed increasing the federal funds rate will bring down growth. But the big item they're missing is what's happening in fiscal policy. We've had $6.5 trillion for 2 years of additional spending that's been monetized. The Fed has bought up all that debt. $6 trillion. Some of it's been saved, but most of it has been spent. That's a huge, $6 trillion, that's like a third of real GDP. It's huge. What's going to be happening over the next couple of years? That deficit, given by the difference between expenses and revenues, that difference in 1920, 20 to 21, the opening of the fiscal year is October, 3 trillion is going to drop to 1 trillion. So all of a sudden, it's still a deficit, a huge deficit, huge historically, but nothing like the 3 trillion, and everything's based on the change. It's like when Isaac Newton invented calculus, it's the derivative that affects things, and the fact that spending is going from a $3 trillion annualized amount down to 1 is $2 trillion. That represents 10%, basically, of all real GDP. Here's the third reason. My stats students will like this because we did this in class a couple weeks ago when I taught them price indexes. This is the nominal wage rate. The average wage rate in the U.S. is $29.50. It's increased to $31. That's an increase of about 5%. Pretty good increase. You would think that that would be good for spending, and it is. But if you adjust for the increase in prices, it turns out that real wage rates have actually dropped almost 2%. In other words, that 5% has completely been wiped away. It's actually negative, and it's going to get worse as unions, as the contracts start getting renewed, especially early next year, in light of this kind of inflation, that will only tend to increase, which means that there's an inflationary tax. It's not coming out of Congress, but it's having a devastating, significant impact on the purchasing power, especially lower income people have. Now, what's the upshot of that story after World War II? I'm going to end this part of the U.S. forecast by going back into time. Remember, the first slide was how, after World War II, money supply increased 25%. Prices took a while, but eventually they were going up 13%, double-digit rates. What happened a few years later? Well, now we're going at 48 to 49, CPI increasing, near 10%. Notice real GDP dropping. The only thing that brought inflation down, that gray area, that's recession. It was that recession that finally broke the back of that inflationary spiral. So this particular story, I think, supports this idea that perhaps this time it's not going to be the Federal Reserve safely landing, fine-tuning, but another period of recession sometime in the future, and perhaps as early as 2023. And with that, I'm going to call my colleague, the director of the Center for Economic Research, Ramon Sphere, who's going to be telling us some interesting findings that we came up with at the center relating to gender differences in employment and labor force. Here he is, Ramon Sphere.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Although the unemployment rate in the United States has declined to 4.2% in November, the labor market is still plagued with problems, even with that low unemployment rate. The coming slides are meant to shed some light on what's happening to employment and to the labor force. First, let me define the labor force. As you well know, the labor force is the sum of the number of employed plus those who are unemployed but say that they have been looking for a job. When the survey is taken, if someone says, I would like to have a job, but I have not been looking, then they are not counted in the labor force altogether. The labor force, the employed, the unemployed, and the unemployment rate are done through what's called the household survey. This is a different survey than what's called the establishment survey, which you read about in the papers, and it publishes payroll employment. So when we talk here about the labor force and the employed, these are from the household survey. In this slide, I separated the labor force for men from the labor force for women to see if there is any difference between the two. The numbers are the change from February 2020. The reason is that was the peak immediately before the beginning of the recession and before COVID-19 took hold in the country. The green line, which is the top one, is for men, and the red line is for women. And I will keep those two colors in the coming slides. You notice that if you look right here at this number, there are slightly less than 1 million people for men below the number that existed in February 2020. For the labor force for women, it is a larger number. It is around 1.3 million people compared to February 2020. So the labor force for men has recuperated more and faster than for women. The labor force participation rate is calculated as a division of the labor force by the population 16 years old and older. You can see again, for most of the month since February 2020, the green line for men is above that for women. And right here, you can see that the labor force participation rate has declined, is still below that of February 2020, but that of women is lower than that. Now, how about employment? This is for the age group 20 to 34. Again, this is the change from February 2020. The employment for the men is around 100,000 less than what it was in February 2020. But for women, it is around 500,000 less than what it was in 2020. So not only is the labor force for women lower than what it was in 2020 and did not recuperate as for men, but the number of employed in this age group is also the same. It tells the same story, that it did not recuperate as fast as for men. How about another age group? The age group 35 to 54. Again, around 100,000 men, right here. That number is below what it was in February 2020. But the employment of women is around 500,000 less than what it was in February 2020 in this age group alone. Now, there are many people who say that some senior citizens may have left the labor force a little early and they retired before the age of 65, and that a larger number of others decided to retire because of COVID-19. And as a result, the labor force for those of 65 and older has not recuperated at all since the month of April and June of 2020. Let's see if that is the case. This is the change in employment for those 65 and over. You can see right here that the employment of those 65 and over who are male is exactly the same as what it was back in February 2020. So all the losses that took place in April, May, and June have been recuperated as far as the males are concerned. But if you look at the women, you still have here, right here, the number is around 250,000 less than what it was in February 2020. So as you can see, it looks like it's the fault of women for all the problems that we have in the labor force. So we can always blame it on women, okay? So let's see if this really is true, okay? Sorry about that. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has reported that a larger percent of women compared to men said that the reason they have not joined the labor force is because of COVID-19. In other words, the burden of COVID-19 has fallen on women much more than it did on men. When it came to child care, and when it came to taking care of the possibility of quarantining the children because of problems that they had at school, that burden has fallen on women much more than it did on men. So actually, we should thank the women for taking on that responsibility. What else can explain what's happening to employment and the labor force? There are more women than men in the sector called education and healthcare, and in another sector, which is leisure and hospitality. And these sectors did not recuperate as much as the rest of the sectors. So when these two sectors have lost a large percentage of employment, more women obviously lost the jobs than men in those two sectors. The number of re-entrants into the labor force has declined from September to October, and again from October to November. When the labor force changes, it's because there are some new entrants to the labor force. That is, people who had never had a job before, and they enter the labor force and they look for a job. But there is another category, which is those who used to be in the labor force, they quit or lost their job, and now they would like to re-enter the labor force. The number of re-entrants is much higher normally than the new entrants. It's, for example, around 2.5 million people, while the new entrants are closer to 500,000. So the decrease in the new entrants from October to November and September to October has made it even more difficult for employers to hire additional employees. I talked about the change in the labor force participation rate compared to February 2020, but how much is the labor force participation rate? In November, it stood at 61.9%. Before COVID-19 and before the beginning of the recession, it was around 63.4%. So that's a difference of around 1.5%. One may say 1.5% is not a huge percentage. But knowing that the labor force is 161 million people, 1.5% means 2.5 million people. These are people who used to be in the labor force, and now they are not. They did not come back to join the labor force. Until we can convince those people in all age groups to really rejoin the labor force and take on the 11 million jobs that are now open, we are going to continue to have issues with labor and with hiring. Thank you very much for listening, and here's Jim to present the California forecast.
Innovation starts with inspiration, and we're inspired. We're Edwards Life Sciences, driven by a passion to help patients live longer, healthier, and more productive lives.
California, and good news here is that California in 2022, our forecast calls for 4.2% growth in jobs. You may recall in the U.S. it was 3.5%, so California will outperform the U.S. Why? Well, the principal reason is what's going on with COVID. But first of all, here this shows you that the California rebound, and the reason California will be doing better is because it did worse during the recession. Between September 19 and 20, that's the darker bar, the U.S. dropped 6.6%, but California dropped 9.2%. Its COVID restrictions were greater to prevent the transmission of COVID. Then in the recovery, and this is actual data from September 20 to 21, the U.S. average went up 3.4%, and California is increasing at a faster rate. Why? Well, what we did was, there's a stringency measure out there that measures nationally, international, and each states how restrictive they were in terms of preventing COVID. Mask wearing, closing schools, bars, restaurants, 11 different measures. It's measured every day. Oxford University, it's coming out of Oxford University. If you take the 10 most stringent states, which California is right there in the middle of those 10, those states lost 9.1%, and over the recovery period, it gained 4.5%. The least stringent states that did not put in, like Florida, for example, or even Texas, they lost only 4.9%, but then the recovery is less because they're not coming from as deep a trench or hole. I'm going to skip that one for now. The important point here is that in this recovery period, that difference in stringency, if you look at the Oxford stringency score, California was roughly 13 points higher last year and this year, up until about June, and then it narrowed. California is still slightly more stringent, maybe by 2 or 3 points, but not significantly so. As a result, the fact that California is loosening up, converging, becoming more like the rest of the nation in terms of stringency, the rebound will be higher. Another reason for California's outperformance next year is what's going on in the ports. I know it's a crisis. I know those ships are backed up. But overall, the reason for that is because of enormous increase in trade. Top 10 U.S. ports, LA and Long Beach are 1 and 2. 1 and 2 in the world as well. Why? Let's look at the increase in 2021. The increase was 13%. We're expecting another, on top of that 13, a 4.7% increase. That 13% is coming from these nations. Here are the top 10 importing nations, with China number 1. The interesting thing is that if you look at Pacific Rim nations, which would be the Long Beach and LA ports, 6 of those are Pacific Rim nations, roughly almost $1 trillion when you come down to it, all moving through those ports, increasing demand. I'm going to skip that for now. In spite of all that growth, in spite of the fact that California will be growing more rapidly during this recovery period, the drop during the recession was so deep that in spite of that recovery, even through the end of next year, given our forecast, we will not be at pre-recession peak in terms of employment. Close, but instead of 17.7 million people working, it's only 17.4. Part of it is because the unemployment rate in California is persistently high. In fact, the difference is widening, and that gap of like 2.5% between the US average and California. That's like 500,000 people more are unemployed in California because of this difference. On the construction side, 2021 was a good year, a good recovery of almost 15%. Next year we see a drop, not much, but 3.2. In spite of the high demand, mortgage rates will be increasing, and that will limit, and weakness on the commercial side as well. Now, I want to spend a little time now, I think, debunking the rationale for the governor's pronouncement of a 3.5 trillion unit shortage in homes, that we have this huge number of homes that we need. Where did that figure come from? But it's the basis for all of this, these lawsuits between cities and the state. There's Sacramento, there's a war going on, for the government foisting these zoning changes at the local level. It's that 3.5 million figure comes from this report. This is a bar chart from a McKinsey & Study report that's seriously flawed, and here's the reason. Here's how they came up with it. Very simple. A 5-year-old can do it. I don't know what McKinsey, what they charge for this, but this is it. They come up with a U.S. average of housing units per capita. Notice it's 419. California's 358. It's a very simple math. You could do it on an envelope. To get from 358 to 419, you need 3.5 million more homes. That's the gist of it. If you look at Maine, 547, I guess McKinsey would say Maine is seriously overhoused. Maine has more vacation homes as a percentage of its housing stock than any other states, number one. 20%. If you remove that 20%, their average would be just like anybody else. Look at the other outlier, Utah. Utah has large families, kind of a religious thing, their values. And with these large families, they don't need it. There are more people per home. It doesn't have anything to do with it being overhoused or underhoused, just the nature of the thing. It's not just that. You know, if you could look at statewide differences in divorce rates, in immigration, immigrants tend to have larger families. The cost of land, which differs. All of those things enter into the complicated free market decision as to how much home you want to buy. It's not simply taking some simple ratio. If you really want to find out whether the market isn't responding adequately, just look at this, and that is, let's take the most recent 10-year period. If there's a growing shortage where home builders aren't able to keep up with the growing demand, then the average number of people living per residential unit should be increasing. Because you're not building enough homes, you're forcing people into not enough adequate housing. That ratio should increase. It's not increasing. Over 10 years, it's about the same. No change. Well, some of you may say, well, that's because they're renting, they'd rather own homes, have a piece of the American dream. Well, if you look at percentage of renters, it's about the same as it was back in 2010. So the data doesn't point to any shortage. So why are California housing prices so high? And they are. This is a graph since 2010, the same, going back to the same period. Most recently, look at what happened in the U.S. Housing prices increased 32%. Amazing. And you would think, oh, maybe now the U.S. is catching up with the lunacy of California. Well, it's not, because California actually increased even more during that same period. What explains that? Well, we just completed a study. We took 81 of the largest counties. This just came out. This has not been released. You're the first to hear about it. We took 81 of the largest counties in the U.S. and looked at the home prices, okay? And we found that median family income, if it increases by 10,000, our econometric analysis equations suggest that housing prices will go up 121,000. Those of you who remember their microeconomics, remember the inelastic demand curve, here's income elasticity. You've probably thought those things would never come back to haunt you. But income elasticity is 1.7, which means a 10% increase in income leads to a 17% increase in housing demand. It's a very elastic good. Incomes go up, you want more housing. Okay? Well, something else we found, these are the two most important variables, amenities. There's a measure put out by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, basically, complicated, but basically how nice it is to live in an area, based mainly on climate. It ranges between -3 for the crummy places to live to +12, the ideal places to live. Okay, and every 1 point leads to 22,000. Okay, let's take that model because I want to show you how it can be used. Orange County, this was for the data back to where we were able to get the median home prices for all these 80 areas, 2019 was 926,000. Detroit's 146. How can that be? It's a home. The difference is almost $800,000. Well, given the numbers I just showed you, Orange County's median income is 107,000, Detroit's 66. Given the ratios I just gave you, that accounts for 545,000. That's that income elasticity. The amenity, Orange County is near the top at 8.74. It is a nice place to live, no question. Detroit is not so nice. Hope we don't have many Detroit people. Anyway, minus 1.73. That same ratio, 220, you add those two up, it's almost exactly the difference. And you could do that for all 80 cities, and you find it explains most of the difference in housing prices. Not because home builders aren't building homes, that's what the Sacramento would love for you to believe, rather than really put the blame where it is, and that is on high taxes. COVID and vaccinations, I'm going to, in lieu of time, just give you the essence of this because it comes down to one slide that's very important. We have been tracking, the Center for Economic Research, COVID and the factors that explain it. There have been 3 spikes. The initial spike, the first half of last year, then the really big spike between July of 20 and July of 21, and then this recent Delta surge. And the factors that explain it change. The first cycle, and we've published 3 or 4 papers on this, the first cycle, which was documented in the Journal of Bioeconomics, caused mainly because of density. Denser states got hit first. Let's remember that people were moving out of cities into the hinterlands. Fortunately, in stage 2, the hinterlands got hit. Density was no longer important. What was really important then was stringency. States with higher stringency, like California, had lower case rates and lower death rates. No question. Stringency had enormous economic cost, but it had that pro to it as well, that advantage. Now the third, stringency doesn't matter anymore. Density doesn't matter. Now it's vaccination rates. And this tells it all. If you look at the average COVID death rate per 100,000 and divide up the 50 states into quintiles, the 10 with the lowest vaccination rates all the way to the 10 with the highest. The lowest had an average vaccination rate between July 4th and the current period of 33.9%. Full vaccination, their COVID death rate was 89.3 per 100,000. Then, if you increase the average rate to 38.1, 61.8, all the way down to the highest, where if the rate was 51.7, by the way, California's is 45, so California is actually in this quintile. But if you were if you had the highest rate of vaccinations, it brought it down to 25.5. Look at how steady that increase. Vaccinations obviously work, not so much in cases, but definitely in death rates. With that, I'm going to bring out my friend and colleague, Fidel Lawande, who's going to be telling you a little bit about First American, our partner in crime, and something he will expand upon. Fidel?
Thank you, Jim. Good afternoon, everyone. And first and foremost, thank you to all of you for being here. Thank you for Bank of America for being a great partner in this economic forecast, and thank you for all of our sponsors. Of course, a great thanks to First American, and especially Mr. Parker Kennedy. I don't know if he's in the audience or not, but a few weeks ago I reached out to him and I asked if we could coordinate a visit of some of our students and the students from 5 other universities to meet with one or two of the executives of First American in preparation for the CFA Institute Global Research Challenge. They're writing a report, an analyst report on First American. And instantly Parker said, yep, we'll do it. Just give me a few days to coordinate with the CEO and find a time to meet with one of the executives. Shortly after, they sent us a date, they sent us a time, and interestingly enough, not one executive, but Parker was there, Dennis, the chairman, and Ken, the president, all were there, and spent 2 hours with our students and the students from the other universities to help them prepare and gain more knowledge about First American. So a big thank you for them on that. Now, I'm going to try to keep this under 2 hours, so bear with me. All right, so let's turn our attention to the markets. I'm going to stop here for a second because Dorothy made this slide just for me, and it's the coolest slide of the entire economic forecast. But in focusing on 2022, if you remember back in June, we introduced the idea of adding diversifiers into our portfolio in order for us to hedge against the volatility, hedge against the variation in the market, and to be able to generate proper returns. For 2022, we're making the same recommendation. We're making the same recommendation as it relates to adding more and more diversifiers into the portfolio for 2 reasons: minimize volatility and income enhancement, all right? So those are the 2 reasons why we're continuing to recommend that. Now, in explaining why, I'm gonna try to address 3 questions that we got back in June when we first introduced this idea. And the first question was, well, how do you reconcile the traditional 80-20 or 60-40, depending on which school you follow, where traditionally we did 80% equity, 20% fixed income, or 60% equity, 40% fixed income. Now, I submit to you that nowadays, that model is kind of outdated. It's extremely outdated. Today, when we're looking at how do we allocate our portfolios, the better question to ask is not how much we put between equities and fixed income. The question to ask is, what are we putting in our portfolios that will enhance our income or return, and what we're gonna allocate in our portfolio that will reduce the volatility. Now, if we look at how those 2 types of portfolios performed in 2021, you'll see, and the green one is the orange one is the typical 70-30, 70 equity, 30 fixed income, and the green graph there will give you the allocation if you're doing 70 US equities and 30 diversifiers. And when you look at the numbers, you'll notice that the equity portfolio with the diversifiers, you would have generated up to the end of November about 18.26% compared to your traditional 730 of a little under 14%. That's a big spread of increased return. Now, notice that the volatility, how they move together. In other words, that for the most part, both portfolios move together. So from a risk perspective, you're taking about the same amount of risk. Yet, by adding diversifiers and focusing in your portfolio on adding these diversifiers, they generated about an additional 4%. All right? Now, the second question that we got after last mid-year update was, well, okay, great. How about if someone is not sophisticated enough to figure out the investment in currencies and the investment in commodities and investments in private equity, hedge funds, venture capital? Can we use traditional investment or investment vehicles to add these diversifiers? And to answer that question, we're not going to go any further than my own son. Here he is, Jeremiah Lawandi. And I know that you're asking, is this a stock picture or a real picture? And if he's posing for the picture. It is a picture of him, and no, he's not posing. This is actually during the COVID shutdown where they had to, wow. This was during the COVID shutdown when they had to do everything online, all right? So if we look at Jeremiah, Jeremiah loves investing and actually started investing about 2 years ago when he was 8. He's 10 now. Now, granted, he is absolutely brilliant. I'm not joking. He is absolutely brilliant. IQ over 142. You could never ask for a smarter child. And he wants to go to film school, by the way. Apple fell away from the tree on that one. But nonetheless, as a 10-year-old, when he picks his investments, and I let him pick his investments, he actually does his own trading, and a few weeks ago, he discovered margin for the first time. But it's a story for a whole different day. My fault. He likes to invest in stuff that he understands, that is simple to understand. So he understands real estate because it's very easy. You own a building, there's buildings there, somebody rents it. As long as somebody wants to rent it, it's very straightforward. He understands energy, specifically oil. And the interesting thing is that because he's still young, he sits in the passenger side in the back. So every time I pull up to the gas station, since he was very little, he would look at the price of gas. And that's how he got actually interested in oil. And eventually, when I gave him his own portfolio, he started actually buying oil. So he has exposure to REITs, energy, and depending on what kind of companies he's looking for, I help him in identifying some opportunities. So he actually has emerging market exposure to India, China, and Mexico. Although Mexico was simply a fluke as it relates to why he wanted to invest in Walmart Mexico. But again, that's a story for another day. But anyhow, so when we look at his portfolio compared to the S&P 500, and by the way, these graphs and numbers are ran through our Bloomberg terminals in the Janes Financial Center. And I believe Donna Janes is with us today, somewhere in the audience. But anyhow, you'll see how his portfolio performed compared to the S&P 500 through the year, this year. And notice that in the beginning of this year, we were talking still about U.S. equities, and we were excited about U.S. equities. And notice that his portfolio actually underperformed the S&P 500 the first half of the year. And it underperformed because the U.S. equities were still doing well, and we were still motivated to invest in U.S. equities. But if you remember, we introduced diversifiers when? Mid-year. Notice his portfolio after the middle of the year. All that green is his outperformance compared to the S&P 500. The diversifiers performed as they should and as we suggested. In fact, he generated about 26.09%, that's up to December 1st, compared to the S&P 500, 23.97%. But what's important to take from that, not only that he outperformed, but the fact that the standard, the beta, in other words, how the portfolio moved with the S&P 500 is under 1. In other words, not only did he outperform the S&P 500 unintentionally, but he did it with a lot less volatility in his portfolio. Now let's compare it to the 730. And the reason, by the way, we're using 730 is because there's typically two camps, 80-20 and 60-40. And if we picked one, the other one would be upset. So we figured we'll just pick the middle and piss off both groups. So let's look at the 730. 14.82% for the 730. His portfolio was 65% almost in diversifiers, 26.09%. That's an 11% differential, ladies and gentlemen. That's why his portfolio is doing better than mine this year. But nonetheless, again, a typical person would say, well, you're adding a lot more diversifiers and stuff in there. You're comparing it to a 730 with 30% in fixed income. You're increasing the risk. That's why you're getting the higher return. But that's not the case. Check out the beta. 1.1%. In other words, compared to the 730 portfolio, his portfolio is moving about the same way as the 730. In other words, he's taking about just the same amount of risk as a 70% in equity, 30% in fixed income. Yet, he's getting an additional 11% return because of the diversifiers in his portfolio. Which brings us to the last question. And that is, the question that was posed to us is this, is that why in the world would we add venture capital, private equity, hedge funds, non-core real estate, when on average, they perform the same way as global equities. And in fact, if you look at this orange line right here, that orange boxes gives you the median for each one of those asset classes. And if you draw a line from global equity all the way across, they're about the same. So why? Why lock in my money and add these diversifiers if I'm not going to get a benefit from it? And the question is very simple. If we look at our traditional investments, in other words, if we look at global equity, global bonds, and US core real estate, the orange is the median. The gray is the range between top and bottom, top performing managers compared to low performing managers. Odds are, no matter who you pick as a manager, your return will be about the same. But look when we actually turn our attention to the diversifiers, the illiquids, if you will. US non-core, global private equity, US venture capital, and hedge funds. What's happening to the range? It's much wider. Top managers, for instance, in global private, 24.5 compared to the bottom, 1.6. If we go to hedge fund managers, 12.9 are the top managers. The lower managers are minus 1.7. So the reality is that when it comes to these private investments, the range is significant. And as a result, when you're picking an advisor, when you're picking the person that is going to help you or the firm that is going to help you identify these investment opportunities, what you're looking for is not someone that will look at an investment and say, yeah, given the volatility and given this is a great thing to invest in, or this is a great company. What you're looking for is advisors that will help you identify the top managers. Because the goal is to identify the managers that are up here. Because if you're up here, then that amplification of return, that income enhancement, becomes much more significant even compared to the portfolios that I've seen you. Jeremiah is not allowed to invest in private equity hedge fund or private equity until he's at least 14. I told him that. That was his punishment for investing in using margin. And he told me after the fact. I was like, great. But anyhow, so identifying the right managers, identifying the firms that not only will be able to get you in with the right managers, their due diligence process in going through and evaluating these firms, looking at the track records of these managers is going to play a key role when it comes to the private investments. All right? And with that, we'll wrap it up with the following. U.S. equities, they're going to continue to be volatile. If we learned anything from the last few weeks, is that the market is looking for any reason to do what? To sell. Inflation, sell. Interest rate potential, sell. COVID, sell. Somebody sneezes, sell. You never know. The market opens up in the morning, closes down by the time it closes, and vice versa, right? So we're seeing a lot of volatility in the US equity markets. And that's fine if we were getting what? If we were getting the return in exchange for the risk that we're taking, that volatility, right? But since we're not getting that return, we'll go to the diversifiers. It's a much better place. 730 portfolios or 60-40 or 80-20 for some people are just not a good asset allocation model anymore. You got to think about what's going to reduce the risk in my portfolio, what's going to enhance the return of my portfolio, because now your universe is going to be much bigger than just equities and fixed income. Incorporating diversifiers may be beneficial. Most certainly, at least for 2022, it's going to play a big role in the returns and the reduction of risk. Diversifiers with private managers, that's your non-core real estate, private equity, venture capital, hedge funds. The key is to identify the professionals, or hiring the professionals, or engaging in the professionals, or you do it yourself if you'd like, to identify not only the top managers, but have a solid due diligence process to identify those managers. All right? With that, I'll turn it back to Jim to give you the California forecast.
Thanks a lot, Fidel. I'm really excited about this because we've got some new, hot information, has not seen the light of day. Been working on it, the center, my colleagues, Fidel and Ramon. So let's get to that. But first, how's Orange County doing? Oh, by the way, did you hear that shake before? Did you feel that? I thought maybe it was an earthquake, which means that we wouldn't have to worry about anything we're talking about right now. But it wasn't. We still don't know what it is. Don Sodero, I think we're earthquake-proof here, aren't we? You helped design the building. Hopefully. Anyway, payroll employment. Orange County, during the recession, did worse than California. This is growth in jobs. Notice it's lower between 22 and 21.1. During the brunt of the recession, Orange County suffered more, mainly because we have the proportion of Orange County devoted to tourism, leisure, and hospitality is greater, so we suffered more. But we've come back stronger, and over the last couple of quarters have actually grown faster than California. Overall, from 19 quarter 4, just before the recession hit, to 21 quarter 3, the most recent data, Orange County, as you can see here, dropped 6.2%, which is above the average of minus 7.6% for California. Did a lot better than LA and San Francisco, which, by the way, right now is a basket case. But even Inland Empire, as hot as that economy is, it still is negative since it has not fully recovered from the COVID recession. I'd like to get into this Chapman UCI Innovation Indicator. We've revised it somewhat, makes it more expansive. There are more industries involved in it. I'm not going to go through all of this. Let me just say that this index, which measures establishments, wages, employment numbers in the highest value-added sectors, as shown by the fact that these sectors in Orange County pay, on average, $125,000 versus non-innovation, $66,000. So these are the jobs we want to produce in Orange County. These are the jobs that will hire our Fowler School engineering graduates and our Schmidt College of Science, STEM graduates, kind of the definition of innovation industries. Another positive aspect of these industries is notice during the recession, it held up. Didn't drop nearly as much as non-innovation jobs, and in fact, innovation jobs are ahead, number of jobs are ahead of what they were pre-recession. Where's Orange County? We track now 50 of the largest MSAs, and the proportion of jobs, establishments, wages in these high value-added sectors. This is, if you want to look at, a vision for Orange County, what is it that we should be focusing on to make our county a better place to live and work. It's to increase our rank in this particular area. The most recent data, 21 quarter one, is a rank of 12. Do you see Orange County? We rank 12th out of the 50, so there are 35 more here. As I mentioned before, Isaac Newton, it's the change that's important. How are we doing over time? If you go to 2015, that was the rank of those same counties in 2015, quarter one, so same quarter. And the green bars indicates those hubs or MSAs that increased by at least 2. The red are those counties that dropped by 2. So you could see Denver did very well. Denver went from 11 to 7, Boston 12 to 10. Salt Lake City is the hottest market in the nation right now, becoming, the Silicon Slopes, I think they call it, going from 18 to 11, big jump, whereas Dallas 17 to 13. Orange County, unfortunately, dropped from 10th in 15 to 12th. Houston, I don't know what's going on in Houston, I have to look at that more carefully, dropped from 7 to 15. This, I think, is the most important figure, at least in my presentation, of the U.S., California, and Orange County. This we just produced, it just came out, we just analyzed it. Since we have this Chapman UCI index, we looked at what is the change in that index number from 2005 to 2021, okay? What was the change? And then we grouped them in 10 categories in terms of where they stand from lowest to highest tax and quintiles. The Tax Foundation measures state and local taxes and ranks them. California right now, I think, is ranked second after New Jersey, New York being third. Anyway, if you take those quintiles, those that have the lowest in the 10 states with the lowest in ranking had an increase of 12.2. Notice how it steadily goes down to the highest taxes. Obviously, California is in this, a drop of 12. If there isn't, this I think graph reveals more than anything else I've ever seen, the negative impact of taxes in the most important area that we have some control over. It's local, state and local taxes. Orange County, however, is suffering more than that because San Diego is under the same onerous taxes in California of any other California county. But San Diego has held its own. In fact, it increased from 6th to 5th, whereas Orange County dropped. I'm not going to go into detail there. There's an article in your review. We identified the 3 areas in the innovation industries, the 50 industries, where Orange County has lagged. The next step is doing survey data to figure out why are these companies locating in San Diego and not Orange County. We have some suspicion, but no hard data, so stay tuned. Payroll employment in Orange County, I point out it's growing faster than Orange County by almost 200 basis points, but by the end of next year, they'll converge together. Total residential permits, not unlike California, nice improvement in 2021, an increase to 7,400 permits, roughly the same this next year. Would have been higher, but higher mortgage rates holding it back. It's a hot market, hot market. You can see the impact of COVID and then the Delta surge in terms of average day. The higher the days to sell the home, the weaker the market. Lower the number of days, the hotter the market. And it's as hot as you can get. Average number of days to sell, the most recent data, is about 20 days. So it's a hot market. Look at inflation. Orange County is right up there, 20%. This is third quarter to third quarter. Second quarter was about 30%, dropping a little bit, but still hot market. Why? Well, we think mainly mortgage rates have gone down from 4.8 to 2.9 over that period. Orange County housing prices increased from 800 to 1.1 million. The handwriting is on the wall, very much dependent upon mortgage rates. And because we believe mortgage rates will be increasing from 3 to 3.9%. That's our U.S. forecast. We believe housing appreciation will continue to decline through all 4 quarters of next year, all the way down to negative by 4th quarter, actual depreciation for around 3%. If rates go higher than we're forecasting, obviously, it will be worse. And if we don't get that mortgage rate increase, inflation will continue, appreciation will continue. I'm going to conclude now with these population trends, which really, people don't, just like I said before, in the U.S., they're not focusing on what's happening to fiscal policy. People don't focus on hard data on population, and something is happening in Orange County that most people are unaware of. And it affects our businesses, our services, demand in the future, and here it is. This is not surprising. This is known, and that is total population in Orange County has been dropping annually from an increase of 1.2% in 2011 down to negative. This was the first year we've had an actual drop in population, overall population growth. Whereas the U.S. has been relatively stable. It's come down a little bit, most recently about 0.4 versus 0.6, but it's growing now while Orange County population is declining. The reason for that? It's not because of the birth rate or the death rate or actually it's not because of drop in foreign immigration. It's because of domestic migration. More people are moving out of the county, moving in, and it's significant. Over a 3-year period, 18, 19, and 20, LA has lost 2.8% of its population. That's huge. Orange County, 2.4, and San Diego, even San Diego, 1.5 loss. Where are we losing that population? This is not known generally. Looking at peeling back the onion, we have found that the major loss in population is, as you would expect, given that migration. If migration is leading to the loss, it's people in the prime working age from 25 to 44, comprised mainly of millennials, by the way. That's kind of the millennial period, which was a little bit of a population bulge. Orange County's gone from roughly 28.5% down to below 25%, while U.S. has been constant. So in 2010, we had more in that prime working age. Now we have considerably less, okay? Remember, that's a percentage. So if the percentage in that age bracket is dropping, that means something else has to be increasing. It's not the 0 to 24. That's been a 1% drop, okay? The 25 to 44, which we just talked about, that graph you just saw, that's a drop of 37% from 2010 to the most recent data we have on 2020. So what's increasing? 55 and over is going up. As much as the prime working age in percentage is dropping by 37%, the Gray Panthers are increasing by 37%. That kind of worries me, by the way. You know, I hit 75 on the same day as my birthday run. I was the youngest in that 75 to 79, but next year, when I turn 76, that means all these young 75-year-old Turks will be nipping at my heels, and there are a lot of them out there. You may say, well, this is a U.S. trend. What's happening in the U.S.? This isn't just Orange County. U.S., 0 to 24, very like Orange County, very little change. But the prime age, it's going up, while Orange County's going down. And it's aging, 25% in the U.S., but nothing like 37% in Orange County. What this points to is a significant change happening to Orange County. Now, this is data that we just got 2 days ago. We've been dreaming of this kind of data. We know where people are moving. We know about this migration. but we didn't know what are the incomes of these people either leaving or coming in. We didn't know. We just had numbers. We were able to access income tax data by location and get a handle on who's leaving and who's coming in based on their incomes. And the prevailing wisdom is, okay, Orange County, California, losing population domestically, moving out of the state versus those moving in. But those are low-income jobs moving out. And even though there aren't as many people moving into California, those are higher-income people. The data reveals that in Orange County, the AGI per tax return for those people moving to other states is almost $96,000. Those coming in, roughly $93,000. So it's not true that higher income people are moving into the county. And the same thing is true for the state. Green, that's California, less than Orange County, but nonetheless the same difference. People leaving California have an average AGI of 93,000, and those moving in 84. So there the difference is even more significant. We just got these data, just had time, not enough time to do a graph. In Texas, just the opposite. First of all, they have domestic in-migration. It's positive. They're not losing. But more importantly, the people coming into Texas have a higher income than those leaving the state. And with that, we'll conclude it, but I'm going to give you the best response on a student evaluation. I think a class in econometrics gets back to this idea of Korean streaming TV. Your class reminds me of a streaming Korean series on Netflix. Like your lectures, they never seem to end. You may be feeling that right now. By the way, if you ever get into this, I advise, because there are some of these Korean dramas, I don't like Squid Games all that much, but some of these others are good. But they go on forever. With that, we're going to have, by the way, you can leave if you want. We're going to have Q&A, but before that, I want to acknowledge a great team. We have Dorothy Farrell, we have Laura Neese, and in particular, I'd like to express appreciation to Linda Corcoran, who has given us 15 years of dedicated service on our Center for Economic Research. She's retiring, and I got her into chicken farming, so I think she's going to become a professional chicken farmer in the future. But thank you, Linda, for your devoted service. Finally, Tom Turk, our dean for the last 5 years, has done a great job. I'm so proud of him because we've been longtime colleagues. I love seeing a faculty member rise to the occasion, become a stellar dean. We're in the search for a new dean. He wants to do what I did, go back to the faculty and have the fun job of teaching and doing research. But during his tenure, we established, I think, the leading program in real estate in Southern California. We have a master's in real estate. We have an incredible program in accounting. The salaries they're paying them for these masters are great. And here, this says it all. Business Week rates independent colleges, the quality of the undergraduate business program, which I have the privilege of teaching in, undergraduate programs. Business Week selected Chapman University as the #1 program in California. I have to give kudos to #2. The #2, not #1, but #2 was USC. So, Tom, stand up and receive our applause and recognition for a great job you did. And now if I could have my teammates, Ramon Sphere, Fidel, can you come out here and join me? Any of you who'd like to leave, don't worry, we've kept you a long time, but if you'd like to stay, we should have some, hopefully an interesting Q&A session. Okay, well, I think we're going to have a roving monitor out there, and don't ask your question until you get to a microphone. In addition to my deteriorating eyesight, I also have deteriorating hearing, so be sure to ask your question to our roving reporter out there. But this first question is kind of interesting. It kind of threw me for a loop. This is one we received via email. This relates to California Prop 19, which is hasn't been voted on yet.
It passed at the end of 2020, and it came into effect February 2021.
Okay, so obviously Fidel's going to be our expert on this one, not me. It says, if my son moves in within the year of my death, the assessed value, I guess, of the home is $455,000. Then there's $1 million exclusion, I believe, to understand, as I understand it, and that property is valued at $1.2 million, and I paid $300,000. The gist of it is this Prop 19 is if your heir, if that heir lives in the home, then that will not affect the real estate taxes. But if your heir continues to own the home, rent it out, or it becomes a secondary home, then Jarvis-Gann Prop 13 is nullified and your home is reassessed.
So the home will get reassessed if whoever inherits it ends up not living in the home as their principal residence. So it has to be the principal resident of the parent. It has to be the principal residence for the child that inherits it. Most children, when they inherit those homes, they're typically live somewhere else, so it ends up being a vacation home, a rental, a second home. And with Proposition 19, it triggers a reassessment on a higher tax bill, of course. Now, the residence requirement by the person that inherits the property is also negated if the property value is over $1 million. And they have kind of different tiers and different, Proposition 19 is kind of a little bit convoluted, but that's the effect of it. But for precise numbers like we're getting in this question, that's when you want to talk to a licensed tax advisor, not an economist.
I received a question earlier relating to Omicron, and are we going to have another Delta surge? Like we had 3, you saw on that graph, 3 surge periods, will there be a 4th? And we're not epidemiologists, we don't know. I don't think anyone really knows, but here's something we do know. If history is any precedent, and I believe in history, and history does repeat itself, if you go back to, for example, any coronavirus pandemic, especially like the so-called Spanish flu, it actually started, we think now, in Kansas, so the Spanish flu is a misnomer. This was between 1920. What happened was it just kept mutating, just like the coronavirus now is mutating, and that will continue to do so. But what's interesting, and I think of most significance in assessing what is the danger, while those mutations tended to be more transmissible, they were much less lethal. So we're hoping that will be the case.
And if you listen to the CEO of Pfizer or the CEO of Moderna on Bloomberg TV or CNBC, at least from what they're talking about, it seems that the medication as it relates to the treatment if somebody contracts COVID and the vaccination, they're able to modify now at a much faster pace to accommodate for those mutations. So if you believe what they're saying, we shouldn't see a significant impact. Now, if you don't, then that's a whole different story.
And we're even finding that the Delta surge, where it's premature to say anything about the Omicron, but the Delta surge, for the first time, we're beginning to see in tracking case rates and death rates that while the case rate's holding up, even increasing, death rates are declining. So that ratio is changing. Again, highly transmissible, but probably because of the vaccinations, not as lethal. Next question here is, how is the chip shortage and labor shortage changing or impacting the economic forecast? That's kind of interesting because it relates to, do we have demand push inflation or supply push? early, when inflation just was hitting, Jerome Powell said it was transitory, he was claiming that it was supply, not demand related. And supply being the fact if you can't get semiconductors, all of a sudden the automobile industry, which could be elastic because automobiles can produce quickly more cars, if you can't get semiconductors, it makes it like gasoline. Becomes inelastic, which means demand changes will lead to sharp increases in price. That's the supply impact. So how is it impacting our economic forecast negatively? You want to take that?
The forecast for the fourth quarter of 2021 and for 2022 relies on data that's available for the first, second, and third quarter of 2021. Since the shortages appear as far as the number of employed people, whether male or female, then the forecast for 2022 is really impacted directly by the shortages. So yes, the shortages that have occurred lately, whether because of supply side or whether because of the labor force problems, or the port issues that we are not able to just clear the merchandise that is leaving the ports and less inventories are available in various stores, then that obviously is impacting directly the forecast for employment as well as the general performance of the economy.
Next question here is, what companies or industries should retirees invest in to avoid significant negative economic impact in the next several years due to the economy? Before I give that to you, Fidel, you could think about it, but my take on it goes back to these innovation industries. I think that's the future of this nation. We're going to be moving away from manufacturing. We're going to be moving into robotics, for example. Robotics are designed by these innovation companies. That's where the future is. And I have a story to relate. This is a family story. I noticed my son, who we're very proud of, Adam is with us, he executive at Salesforce.com. When he was 1 year old, I bought 5 shares of Apple stock. So that was roughly 45 years ago. 5 shares was $100, which to me at the time was a lot of money. Those 5 shares, and Adam was astute enough to hold on for 45 years. Those 5 shares, which cost $100, are now worth plus $60,000. And he's still holding on to those shares. But again, that goes back to if you can get into where there are going to be cycles that those industries will be more cyclical than others. But overall, we're becoming a tech-oriented society, tech-oriented world. That's where the action is. That's why I guess Chapman University is devoting more and more of our resources to that Schmidt College and the Fowler School of Engineering.
Well, as it relates to retirees or people who are close to retirement, there isn't a magic bullet and there isn't a magic company. And while there are industries that are favorable now, they may not be favorable. And candidly, and to be honest with each other, we're just living way too long now. When they set the retirement age at 65 or 60, people were, on average passing away around 65 or so. So, money had to last you for 5 years, maybe 10 at the most. Now, the average ages are well into the 90s. So when you retire at 60, your money has to last you to be safe, about 30 plus years. So it's no longer that you could approach it from, okay, well, what kind of returns can I get now? And it's important, like I mentioned in the forecast, to look at the portfolio in its entirety and balance that risk reduction to the income that you need and the income you need to generate. And candidly, I have no affiliation with any investment firms or whatnot, so I say this from just experience. Candidly, that's where it's very important to work with a quality investment firm. It's absolutely imperative because You can't do it on, unless you've been doing it for a long time and you have the experience and you have the knowledge, you can't do it on your own and expect the money to last for 30 plus years. So if there was an advice, it's not here's a company or here's a handful of companies to invest in. The advice would be to find a good firm with good expertise and good knowledge to allow you to figure out how to manage that money over a much longer period of time than what originally been anticipated when it came to retirement money.
And we have some suggestions. Maybe we can discuss those after the forecast in terms of what kind of companies out there that can help you in that regard.
Quite a few of our sponsors.
Yes, exactly. Here's an interesting one. What impact do you think the Fed's proposed interest rate hikes will have on housing prices? Interesting in that the hikes are short-term rates when the negative impact would come from higher mortgage rates. Remember from the forecast, we talked about this tapering of the bond buying program, $125 billion of bonds being acquired by the Fed, net purchases every month. Those have not all been Treasury bonds. Increasingly, they're mortgage-backed securities as well. And even on the Treasury side, what they used to do, only short-term bonds, 90-day, 5-year. Now they're long-term, 10-year and longer Treasury bonds as well. So the point here is that tapering will have a much more dramatic impact on mortgage rates than it used to have in the past, and will increase mortgage rates, and obviously that is leading us to that forecast of depreciation in housing prices in Orange County. Mild, only 3%, but if the interest rate moves back to 5-6%, it will be a more significant adjustment out there.
But it's important to kind of recognize real quick that the Fed don't change interest rates. They change the Fed fund rate, and as a result, it impacts other interest rates. So to Jim's point, as it relates to looking at the mortgage numbers or the mortgage rates, looking at the 10-year Treasury, which explains a good percentage of mortgage rates. It explains about 82% of mortgage rates, and looking at the sale of mortgage-backed securities and how it impacts the yields or the returns on the mortgage-backed securities.
One last thing they do, this is a new tool that happened during the Great Recession. The Fed now can pay interest on member bank deposits in the Fed when they're reserves. They now get an interest rate return. During times of contraction, what the Fed will do is not only taper bond purchases and increase the federal funds rate, but will also increase the rate paid on those reserves, which will make banks and financial institutions less inclined to issue a mortgage when they can just, keep their money in the Federal Reserve and get a safe and secure interest rate return. So look at that rate will probably marginally increase as well. So if we could have the House, any questions out there before we conclude our program today? Yes, here we have, there's one up there. We'll get you, don't worry, before we end. There's a question up there with the microphone. Is there?
Yeah.
Why don't you shout it out loudly?
Okay. With the mic? Yeah. Okay. My question was in regards to the Orange County change of people coming in and going out. There was a comment there about the income of this immigration that we're having. And the comment was that the people that was coming in is not a high income. But do you have in consideration when doing that calculation that these people that is moving in is probably going to, because they got a new job in the area, so the income will be different from now on? Or I don't know how far back goes the data information that you guys use.
Since I didn't fully hear your question, I'm going to turn to Fidel. You didn't either?
I didn't either.
Did you? I'm sorry. We're just not getting it up here. I'm glad I'm not alone here.
Oh, okay.
Maybe come up farther, closer, and then we can get it. Does anybody?
You hear me good now? It's good? No? Okay.
Ken, how are you doing?
With inflation on one hand and the
Okay, that's a great question, a tough question. The gist of it is, okay, mortgage rates are going up, and you know, if you believe our forecast that there's going to be a drop in prices, only 3%, should you buy now and take advantage of the low mortgage rate and ride out that negative cycle? You know what? My gut, I don't have an actual number to tell you because it would depend what happens to mortgage rates, but my gut right now would say buy now because, at least in Orange County, and here's why. If you look at the history of real estate in Orange County, during periods of rising prices, Orange County, even California, the peak is like double what happens in the US, and during periods of correction, it's down, but it doesn't correct by as much. So at least right now, I think it's a close call, but right now, I would say that if you can get a deal out there, that's the tough one, but if you could get a deal out there, maybe even on commercial property, take advantage of the low mortgage rate and ride out that next cycle. But that may change, so stay tuned and maybe come back at our update conference. Do you have any?
Yeah, for a long, if you're a long-term investor, and that's a big if, I agree 100% with Jim because real estate has a tendency to go up over time. Yeah, ride the down cycle, but right now it's free money, right? When I refinanced my home, and I could share this, at 1.65 interest rate, even if inflation goes back to normal at 2%, I'm still at negative interest rate on my mortgage. It's beyond free money, right, when you adjust for inflation. So given the rates right now, it's free money. It would be absurd not to take advantage of it. So when the opportunity poses itself, it would be probably the right thing to do.
I wouldn't say that's the case for commercial property. I think that on the commercial property side, while industrial looks good, even retail isn't all that bad because the price is down. The real problem is on the office side, especially AAA office space. I think we're just beginning to see a downturn there as leases end and companies have the opportunity to lease less space or at a rate that is adjusted downward. I think the correction on the commercial price side, at least for the next couple of years, could be quite significant. So that will be certainly a more speculative area and a much riskier investment. So I would say stay away from that kind of investment until the dust settles. Anything to add?
I think the benefit from the low mortgage rate today outweighs the possibility of a 2, 3, or 4% decrease in the coming year or two in the price of homes. Especially that the number of listings is at record lows these days, and it is expected to continue to be low. So there's no expectation of a very large correction in the housing market.
Now remember, during the Great Recession, home prices in Orange County depreciated by 33%. It was a huge reduction. Now if that happens, that's a different story, but for that to happen, mortgage rates would have to increase more sharply than just going to 4%. It'd have to be more in the 5.5%, perhaps 6%, which is possible, but we don't see that happening now. In fact, it appears that what could happen now is that if this recession that I was talking about, the growing likelihood of one, the sooner it hits, the easier it will be to adjust, and the impact on housing prices and other areas of economic activity will be milder. Just like what happened during the Great Recession when Alan Greenspan just held up and kept the recovery going, it will depend on how quickly the Fed will increase the federal funds rate and cool the economy. Take away the punch bowl. I suspect that now that Jerome Powell has been reappointed, I think he will increasingly move from being dovish to more of a hawk and a sharper increase in the federal funds rate and all of the other mechanisms that the Fed has to cool the economy. Yes?
Do you think the Fed will ever be able to reduce the balance sheet of bonds, or is this the new normal
Yeah.
as we go forward?
The question is, do you think the Federal Reserve will ever be able to reduce the balance sheet, the assets, the enormous increase in assets? I mean, it wasn't that long ago, really, probably pre-Great Recession, when the assets were some of the were like around 1.5 trillion, and now they're like 8 or 9 trillion. I mean, it's huge, huge increase in assets. The question is, can they ever bring it down? You know, quite frankly, I don't think so. They can, but it would lead to, you know, actual contraction. So when we're talking about tapering from $125 billion of asset purchases every month down to zero, I'm not talking about actually selling securities where it actually goes negative. That's what would have to happen. You could have a short period of that, maybe squeeze about $1 trillion off of that, but that's very deflationary and would have probably a much greater impact, negative impact on the economy than the Fed would allow. So I don't think there's going to be any realistic reduction. It's just more of a question is how slowly it will continue to increase.
Do you think history will look kindly 50 years from now back on QE, or no?
So the question is, will history look back kindly on, did you say the last?
Quantitative easing. Quantitative easing.
Oh, on the quantitative easing. No, I think it'll be like another Alan Greenspan. It was because of that I think history will say it was just too much.
It was,
$6 trillion of deficit, monetizing that entire amount with $6 trillion adding to the assets of the Federal Reserve, that it was essential to do something, but not that much. And as a result, it created inflationary pressure. That's it's the medicine. So right now, what COVID did was the Fed and the fiscal response, our government, I think correctly thought we have to take some medicine. And that medicine is to revive the economy in light of all of these job losses and the horrible things happening during the depth of the COVID period and recession mid last year and the first quarter of last year. But now you're going to be paying the price, the withdrawal, if you will. Now, when you have when you have such a huge fiscal and monetary stimulus, now even if they're still even with a deficit of $1 trillion that we're projecting out in the future, the fact that it's less than the 3 means it's restricted. It's constraining the economy. It's it's a contractionary rather than an expansionary policy, simply because we took too much medicine. So I think that's where history will be in the future. And not that bad a rap, because it seems like we've always done that in the past, but this time we really went bonkers. All, in terms of the magnitude.
One of my favorite numbers of 2020, despite the fact that we had high unemployment, the economy was shut down, the increase in net savings of the U.S. population went up by $1.6 trillion. That's a lot of extra medicine that we did not need. And we're seeing it in inflation today. So.
Yeah. Other questions? One more question, then yes.
How do you feel about cryptocurrency as a diversifier?
Did you hear that? What?
Yeah, how do I feel about cryptocurrency as a diversifier? I got my 2 cryptocurrency experts are sitting right up here, especially this young lady here, Eva, who does that for a hobby. She's a Chapman grad. But my concern with cryptocurrency is this. tomorrow morning, somebody pulls the plug on all the servers that carry the cryptocurrency. Where's the currency? Unless you have it on a flash drive, right? A physical drive, your assets and your investments are gone. So does it work as a diversifier? It does, but it's purely speculative, and it only exists because a group of people agreed that it exists. And that's where I have a challenge with it. But I am an old guy. Compared to the younger generation, they're completely comfortable with it. So I think, does it have a place as a diversifier? It does. Does it work for everybody? It might not, because of the simple fact that for some generation, it will continue to be just not something that it makes sense to them.
Fidel, are you worried at all? I am. If you're in that market, the possibility of growing federal regulation. In China, they saw it as a threat. They want to have more control of these transactions, so they basically socialized it by taking that over. And I'm concerned that the Fed will see this as competition, that the currency is the purview of the government. It should control it. And are you worried about that regulation?
As it stands right now, it would be very difficult to get it regulated. There's a reason why some of the big players in the cryptocurrency are people that, well, or institutions or governments that like to hide money and not do so fun stuff. So it's very hard to regulate, because how often do new currencies come up, Eva? Every day there's a new cryptocurrency. And trust me, she checks every day more than once. So the reality of the matter is that it would be very difficult to regulate something that pops up every day, and it could pop up on a server anywhere in the world.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I think our time has run out. We're going to be around for a while out in the lobby if you have other questions. But I want to thank you again for your support, for being here, braving the storm, and wish all of you a great holiday and the happy and healthiest of New Year's, and hope to see you next June at the update forecast. Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy holidays, everyone.